Hi, this is Marco Pimentel. Welcome to the podcast Someone Like You. In this first season, you'll discover founders, creators, entrepreneurs, and business owners who are passionate about creating business models with lasting, sustainable climate solutions.
We're never going to solve climate change until we democratize access to clean energy. We can't just operate with status quo where only a small portion of America gets clean energy themselves, or a minority of utilities are providing it. So democratizing access to clean energy looks like having more people access clean energy regardless of their rooftop, their income, and other markers of privilege.
Community solar. Solar is now one of the most affordable energy sources available. Yes, it's more affordable to create energy from solar versus coal, but when we think about powering our home, the costs are still quite prohibitive. Government grants, the Inflation Reduction Act, drastically help ensure more renewables are available, but it's estimated that still over 90 million homes in the US cannot install solar panels for energy due to the upfront costs. Finding a solution that ensures energy equity is important, and that brings me to this week's episode. Joining me is Steph Spiers, voted 2022's New England Entrepreneur of the Year. Steph is the co-founder and the CEO at Solstice, an enterprise dedicated to radically expanding the number of American households that can take advantage of clean energy using community-shared solar farms. It is Solstice's mission to work towards greater energy equity and a future in which clean energy works for every American household, regardless of income level, their credit score, or any other factor. More so, Solstice has developed the Energy Score for a more inclusive solar future. Steph is an entrepreneur and community builder with management experience in the Middle East, South Asia, and the United States. She believes in deliberate innovation leading to social progress, and through her work at Solstice, wants struggling families to access the same opportunities she's been fortunate to have. Here is our conversation. Steph, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So I'd love to just start with a bit of your background. Why did you get into climate and solar, and kind of what shaped you to the work that you're doing today?
Growing up, I never thought that I would end up in environmentalism and solar. So it's a journey, but probably starts in Hawaii, where I'm born and raised. My parents were immigrants. My dad was born on a road in Laos, and my mom was born in Korea, and they met in Hawaii. A lot of people do that from Asia. They try to go to the US and they get to Hawaii and they say, this is far enough, this is good. So I was born and raised there. And there's two things that really formed my value system throughout the rest of my life. One is growing up in Hawaii, we're just so lucky to be around so much natural beauty. And that natural beauty has really been stewarded and cultivated for a long time, many generations by the Hawaiian people. And the Hawaiian people have certain values around taking care of the land. And they don't think of the land as something inanimate. They think of the land as their ancestor. And when you think of the land like your ancestor, you do a really good job of trying to live in balance with it and taking care of it, and realizing that the land, the air, the ocean, they all nourish you just like people do. And so that's a core value system I grew up with. And then the second is being raised by a single mom who worked minimum wage jobs, often 3 jobs at a time, just to make ends meet, meant that I grew up seeing this queen of a woman, my mother, who had an accent because of her immigrant background, be treated really badly by people growing up. And she worked in a call center and got yelled at and told to go back to her own country on a often daily basis. And so to see this dignified, incredibly smart, capable woman be treated so badly made me realize that the lines that divide us, the haves and the have-nots, are sometimes so arbitrary and so outside of our control. And it didn't make sense to me that my mom couldn't have opportunities. And because she sacrificed for us 3 kids, I got to get a good education. I got to be a scholarship kid at good schools. And that changed the trajectory of my life compared to my mother's life. So I had one foot in the elite world of education and one foot back home in relative poverty with my amazing mother. And it made me realize that talent is universal, but opportunity is not. And I wanted to spend my life working on issues of inequality, and that's what I started doing, and then eventually found myself working on environmentalism.
I love the background story. Obviously, the two really important parts of it, and also the way that you connect Hawaii to the land and the ancestry roots. And I live on the west coast of Canada, and we tend to, because of the environment and the beauty of the forest, the oceans, everything as well. You tend to get people that appreciate it a little bit more, and not to say that you have to live in it to appreciate it, but it definitely gives you a bit of a different context. So I'd love to understand a little bit around your work experience at Acumen. If you can kind of touch around what is Acumen and how that potentially led to, co-founding Solstice, which you co-founded in 2014.
Yeah, acumen was a really important chapter in my career. I had actually previously worked in a very different area. I worked in politics and campaigning, and I worked in foreign policy in the U.S. government through the Obama years. And I was working in the Middle East and realized that I'm looking around and seeing all these people, they don't have enough power to fuel their daily lives. And there's so much sun in the Middle East, and why aren't we using it? So I went to grad school, and grad school led me to Acumen, this nonprofit venture fund that invests in solutions that address the alleviation of poverty. So you can imagine a nonprofit fund that's investing in business solutions that alleviate poverty. It's pretty unusual funder to have in the for-profit space. And so really was excited about the companies they were invested in. These were companies that had the audacity to imagine the world as it could be rather than the world as it is. And the founder of Acumen, Jacqueline Novogratz, is this renowned thinker and activist, trying to get the business world to act more morally. And she was a huge influence on wanting to start Solstice. One of our core values at Solstice is an acumen value, which is to do what's right and not what's easy, and having integrity. And I didn't mean to cut you off there. You were going to ask a question.
No, the question was, in terms of Acumen, what were the types of projects that you got to, work on firsthand?
Yeah. So I worked as an intern. I was a 30-year-old intern after working at the White House, in Pakistan, and I was working in their venture capital portfolio management side, looking for new companies to invest in. And I got to really do the pioneering of their renewable investment strategy in Pakistan. And from there, I worked for one of their portfolio companies in India. I worked in marketing and sales in India for a company called D-Light, which is a solar company that provides solar lanterns and solar home systems for the people who live off grid, people who don't have electricity at all, who tend to be extremely low income. So having that experience, going to different parts of India that were so far flung and had no electricity grid, and seeing local entrepreneurs bring in solar lanterns to their community and having success selling them, and seeing the people who use the solar lanterns have a health and financial benefits of not using diesel generators or other or studying by firelight, made me realize that solar is transformative, and it's also transformative for people who have the lowest incomes, the people who are most affected by climate change but do the least to increase emissions in the world. It made me realize that they need solar and clean energy access more than anyone, which is essentially the mission of Solstice.
So, what was your founding kind of idea or thesis back in 2014? You have some experience with Acumen. You're seeing firsthand how essentially electricity, which equals power, lights on, simple things like that, have had such a massive impact to these communities. What was your initial kind of thesis and idea for Solstice?
Yeah, I was walking around in India and Pakistan working on renewable energy, and I had this realization that I don't have to be halfway across the world working on energy access because back home in America, so few people have access to clean energy. And the more I looked into it, the more the statistics were staggering. 4 out of 5 Americans cannot put solar on their own rooftop and are thus locked out of the solar market. And this is at a time where solar is getting cheaper and cheaper and is often cheaper than fossil fuels and can save people money. And the people that do get solar are tend to be higher income homeowners, not the people who need solar savings the most, like low to moderate income Americans like my mom. And so that's what led me and my co-founders to say, let's start an organization in America that's working on energy access. And let's build a company around this idea that clean energy is a human right and we can get access to people who need savings the most. So in 2014, we initially started Solstice as a nonprofit, and that nonprofit is still operating now. It it's working to make solar more accessible to everyone, but especially low income Americans and communities of color. And then in 2017, we actually spun out a software company and customer services company because we realized a lot of the software in this space was really bad and we wanted to build better software that made clean energy more accessible. So that's what led us to spin out another company in 2017. We have another incredible solar activist who leads the nonprofit today, and her name is Yesenia Rivera. And the nonprofit is in the process of rebranding to be called Energy Allies. And in the company that we started, Solstice Power Technologies, that's a company that connects households and businesses to community shared solar farms. And community solar is a new type of solar out there. I don't know. Have you seen much of it in your backyard by any chance?
No, and we in BC we dammed a lot of rivers many years ago, and so we deem ourselves to have renewable energy to almost the tune of about 95 or 98% of our energy in BC because of the dams. And we do solar is definitely growing, but we definitely do not have any of these community solar gardens. I just would love to understand what is that and how does it work?
Yeah, so community solar is this new idea. And if you haven't heard about it, it's there's no shame because it just really started as a recent phenomenon. It's a new type of solar where you don't have to put solar on your own rooftop. You as a residential consumer, you can subscribe to a local community shared solar farm that's built somewhere in the same utility zone that you live in, and you can subscribe to a portion of the shared solar farm and generate credits from that electricity production of your solar farm that shows up on your utility bill. So if you were signing up, we would look at your electricity usage and we'd say, okay, you use this much electricity. We'll give you the number of panels on the shared solar farm that's equivalent to your usage. Whatever these panels produce in terms of electricity every month, we'll credit your utility bill. And it's a real innovation because it allows people who cannot put it on their rooftop, that 4 out of 5 Americans I mentioned, to finally get access to solar. And what makes it even more accessible is that it's generally offered at a guaranteed discount. People are saving about 10 to 20% off their electricity bills by participating in community solar because there's regulations that support the building of community solar. And those state regulations allow people to get guaranteed energy savings. So they don't have to put anything on their home. They put nothing up front and they're saving 10 to 20% on their electricity bills. This, for the first time in the history of energy, makes solar not a premium product, but an energy savings product. And that means that low to moderate income Americans can benefit from it. People who haven't gotten around to putting solar on the rooftop or they can't can benefit from it. So it's just a way more accessible form of solar that's been possible in the past.
So to understand it maybe a little bit more in detail. So, my example here in BC in the province here, and obviously I'm sure it's different from state by state. When we have hydroelectricity from dams, the electricity that's comes from those dams gets sent into a grid, and that grid then powers our home. So when I get my utility bill and my X bill for my energy, I don't know where that power ultimately came from. And maybe I'm naive. I could probably dive into the data and look into and understand it, but most people probably wouldn't. But we know that it's coming likely from dams. So is this the solar community farms? Are big utility companies doing this as well? Like how does that ultimately work? Are you building, a huge community solar farm ahead of time, and then you try to onboard, kind of door by door people that can subscribe to this? So like I guess understanding the differences between, the larger utility companies, and why aren't they doing that, or are they doing that to supplement some of their energy, and how is that a bit different?
Yeah. And, US electricity generation is getting more and more renewable dependent, but it's only about 19 to 20% of utility electricity generation comes from renewables right now. So, in order to solve climate change, the UN says that we have to get the majority of people on clean energy in the next 8 years. And to do that, we can't rely just on utility provided power. And this gets into how utilities in America make money, and it gets into what they're incentivized to do. So the vast majority of utilities that represent the majority of Americans earn money by building infrastructure. And they're not actually incentivized to make sure that infrastructure is clean, or that they're definitely not incentivized to decrease people's electricity consumption, because when people use less electricity, utilities in America actually earn less revenue. So that's why we do need a system in which other power generators are part of the grid, producing electricity closer to where people use electricity, because it's a more efficient distribution of electricity. And having power generation closer to where people use it, and getting away from the centralized generation of electricity that we've experienced for over a century, is key to having a grid that is resilient to natural disasters and climate change. So you have to have more distributed power generation to be resilient to the grid outages that come with climate change, natural disasters. But also we need to get the grid off of fossil fuels as soon as possible. And having people build their own solar on their own homes and take part in community solar, and having businesses and corporations buy renewables, is actually what is incentivizing utilities to go source more renewables. So we're all part of this ecosystem where we all have a part to play. And the utilities and how they choose to generate power is only one small part of the ecosystem. How we choose to get power and how we encourage things like community solar will actually affect how successful we are at mitigating climate change. So to your specific question, you currently get grid power. Why aren't grid utilities offering more renewables? Well, they're not incentivized to. How do we get them to do that? We build power generation closer to communities and have that be renewables. So having third-party solar developers, which operate like commercial real estate developers, but solar developers create projects all over the country that utilities wouldn't do themselves. And that's also increasing the amount of renewables that we're putting on the grid and helping mitigate climate change.
Every week on Someone Like You, we dive into stimulating conversations with founders, entrepreneurs, business owners, and the likes who are consciously and successfully creating sustainable business solutions for the long haul. Tune in every week for a new inspiring conversation on leading climate solutions, And if you're enjoying the podcast, don't forget, please subscribe on the platform of your choice and give us a rating and a review. And so for Solstice, the business aspect, to be able to, you mentioned that homeowners can subscribe with no cost up front and ultimately are able to reduce the cost, and also, like you said, they're able to feel good because often, especially right now, and I hope in the future, the cost for buying electric car is more expensive than a gas car, and is unfair to people that can't afford it to have these type of solutions. So when how do you get a community solar farm started? You mentioned solar developers. So do you partner with a solar developer, and Solstice's job is to provide the demand, and you partner with somebody that provides the supply? How does that mechanics of the business work?
Yeah, great question. So you have a ton of solar developers all over the country, and they do a really good job of putting solar in the ground. They go out and get the permits, they lease the land, they get the financing. And like commercial real estate developers, they're good at building the infrastructure. What solar developers are not uh, just born to do is deal with a lot of customers, because traditionally they just sold the power back to the utility, or they sell the power to one corporate customer. They're not dealing with thousands or millions of residential customers. They don't have software, they don't have sales and marketing teams, they don't know how to market to communities and earn their trust. And so that's why they partner with an entity like Solstice. Solstice is a customer services and software provider that connects end user households to these shared solar farms. And so we partner with the solar developers that are building the projects. And we, for the life of the project, which is 20 plus years, we go out and manage all the customers that are residential customers for those projects. So the solar developer wants to build a solar farm. They come to Solstice saying, hey, we want to build a solar farm in this area. Can you help us find customers? And can you manage all those customers' billing for the life of the project? Can you handle the customer service? And they pay us to manage their customers and be the face of the project to their customers. And they can focus on the development aspect. So we manage the end-to-end customer experience from when a customer comes in to managing their billing every month for the next 20 years of the project. And we enter a relationship with each of our homeowner or renter customers like it's a 20-year relationship. So we're deeply invested in them having a good experience. We're deeply investing in being in their lives for the next 20 years, and we care about them as people. And that's probably how Solstice has made um, a little bit of a differentiated name for ourselves, is caring about low income inclusion, which is pretty rare in energy as a for-profit business, and working towards that. And we have specific tools that we've done to do that. And also caring deeply about customer satisfaction and treating people like they're in a 20-year relationship with us, as opposed to typical energy companies will just go door to door, treat customers like strangers, and then move on to their next sale.
And how do you build that brand, that market to customers? You mentioned door to door, and I'm thinking about an experience I had fairly recently where, the area that I live in, where we didn't have fiber yet a few years ago, and I remember the company coming door to door saying, "We're going to want to put fiber in the area. Would you be interested in it?" Yes, and they sign up enough people around the block, and then they get the lines put in. How do you get your first customers, your first area? How did you market to those customers and start building up the demand side?
Yeah, it's a good question, because, those typical energy companies definitely use stranger to stranger methods of reaching people. So door to door is one. Sometimes you'll see someone tabling at a farmer's market or at a home improvement store. There will be a stand for a solar company, and they'll try to yell at people as they walk by. And that's all stranger to stranger. And it can work, but it actually works at low single digit conversion rates, because no one has a relationship with that person who's yelling at them as they walk by. If I show up to your door and I ask you to sign up for solar, you're probably going to sign up at a 1 to 2% conversion rate. And we have to solve climate change faster than that. How Solstice finds customers is we work through community partnerships, and we work through the community members that validate us to their community. And they say, hey, sign up with Solstice. I trust them. And because we have a trusted ambassador telling their community about Solstice, we get conversion rates between 30 and 50%, depending on that trusted channel. And we don't just work with individual ambassadors, we work with local municipalities, real estate aggregators. We work with corporates, nonprofits that work with disadvantaged communities. So we have a lot of different type of local community partners, and those partners are the ones that open up their networks to us. So people think that we operate in the currency of electricity or we operate in the currency of money in our world, but we actually operate with the currency of trust. Trust is the most important asset that we have, and trust is earned, not entitled. And especially in the communities, and especially in disadvantaged communities, which have been cheated by so many people, trust is sacred. And so we work hard to earn that trust by building relationships with community partners and having them be our ambassadors to their communities. And we find that we sign up people way faster. It's a lower acquisition cost than traditional stranger to stranger channels. And we also have lower churn rates. When we go through trusted channels, people churn much less because they feel like they have a relationship with us and their project. So it's just all beneficial, which is why I I believe fervently that communities are actually the most scalable force in the world, which is not something you hear in business. Most people in business say, "Oh, communities, that sounds small scale, that's too local, that's not scalable." And and we have the proof and we have the numbers quantifiably showing that the volume of customers we achieve when we go through these partnership channels is massively higher than we when we try to sell people one-on-one through strangers or ourselves. And that's how the world works. People do what their friends do, and we're just utilizing that to get the maximum number of people on clean energy as fast as possible.
It seems like you've built built, but are leveraging because of this trust and the great customer success that you've built. So there are of course a lot of background factors to being able to do it, but it sounds like you built a scalable word of mouth system because of really deeply rooting yourself in community and making sure that you provide a great solution. And on scale, it really works well because of these amazing community partners, the word of mouth scale of neighbors to neighbors, friends to friends, community members to community members, and mentioning 30 to 50% conversion rate is just that sounds like the great word of mouth type of experience that people get, and it sounds like you can do that on a scalable way too, which is really quite unique. So when somebody hears about Solstice, gets really excited and says, I would love to do this. What type of experience is it for an individual customer? Is it as simple as kind of signing up? You work on making sure that energy comes into their area or their home in with the power to the grid from the community solar farm. Like, how does that experience for the customer work?
Yeah. I mean, sometimes they hear about us themselves and they come to our website, solstice.us, and they look to see if there's a solar farm in their area by filling out the Go Solar form. And sometimes they hear about us through that community partner that I mentioned, in which case their community partner has a landing page where it takes them to our enrollment page on our website, enroll.solstice.us. And so in basically 5 minutes, you can be signed up either to get connected to a solar farm in your community, or you can be put on a wait list and we'll let you know if there's one coming towards you in the future. Because community solar is so new, it's not in every state yet. And the maddening thing that people don't often know about electricity and energy in the United States is that it's often run entirely by state regulations. So you don't have one national regulatory regime where you can offer the same product in 50 states. That just doesn't exist in energy in the US. So you really have to offer different products in different states depending on the rules of that state. So community solar got started commercially around 2015. It's 2022 now, and there's over 2 gigawatts of community solar that's been built, which is fuels maybe a few 100,000 households in America. So there's still a lot more that we can build. And the latest climate legislation, the Inflation Reduction Act that passed just in August, has a lot of provisions in it trying to boost community solar with more tax incentives, with more community level grants, because community solar is the most accessible type of solar out there. So you can go on our website and either get on a project now in the states that it's allowed, or when you sign up on the wait list, that helps us go back to developers and say, look, there are a bunch of people in this area that want a solar farm. You should build one here. So either way, signing up now or later, you can kind of generate demand for solar. And that generation of demand helps projects get built.
You mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act. I was curious how that impacts either Solstice or your community farm developers or the individual customers. How will this impact your business?
The Inflation Reduction Act is transformative. I mean, it doesn't go as far as we would have liked on climate. It got kind of watered down from the previous Build Back Better bill, which had better provisions, but it's still the biggest funding of climate in the United States history. And for the first time, you had money going towards low income inclusion in clean energy access. And democratizing access to clean energy is really important because we're never going to solve climate change until we democratize access to clean energy. We can't just operate with status quo where only a small portion of America gets clean energy themselves, or a minority of utilities are providing it. So democratizing access to clean energy looks like having more people access clean energy regardless of their rooftop, their income, and other markers of privilege. And the Inflation Reduction Act puts money towards that. It says that developers will get much more in tax credits if they have at least 50% of their project go to low income customers. That's huge. And the Inflation Reduction Act isn't just incentivizing solar, it's incentivizing EVs, it's incentivizing rooftop solar with storage. It's incentivizing energy efficiency upgrades. It's incentivizing electric appliances. It's really an exciting time to work in energy. It's been a hard industry to work in the last few decades because it hasn't always been supported on a regulatory level. But the Inflation Reduction Act changes everything in energy. And just by making it more financially viable, because it's putting subsidies where we need to put subsidies, which is technologies that get us off fossil fuels. So in community solar, it also is encouraging the growth of community solar by putting funding towards it. And it gives companies like Solstice and communities that are low income and communities of color better access to grants to bring solar projects to their own communities. It also has developers. It has provisions where they get extra incentives if they hire workforce from disadvantaged communities. And so it is trying to make the energy system more accessible, more equitable, and it absolutely will increase the amount of solar that gets built by virtue of all these incentives.
So looking back, 2014, you had this idea. You started the business. Now we're close to 2022, the end of 2022. How many members or how many community members have you been able to sign up to join these community solar farms?
Yeah. So one point of clarification is that we started out finding customers for solar projects. And then in 2020, we created our own software to manage those projects ourselves. So we have generated demand for 20,000 customers getting connected to local solar farms in community solar. And that is equivalent to about 148 megawatts of solar being built as a result of our customers signing up.
Wow. And how did you fund the business along the way?
Fundraising was an interesting challenge. I'm sure you've heard the statistic that less than 2% of venture capital goes to women. And when you look at the percentage that goes to women of color, it's even less than that. And my co-founder and I are both women of color. And initially we struggled to find people to believe in the business. It was a lot of people saying, "Yeah, I'm not sure community solar is going to be a real thing because we haven't seen nationwide legislation supporting it. It seems small." Or other investors said, "I don't know that low income inclusion is actually a business proposition. Like, I don't think that that's going to be very lucrative." And so we struggled initially to raise funding. Initially, we got it from accelerators that were mission driven, like Echoing Green is one that was our first funder. And angel groups were really instrumental, like Social Venture Network and Next Wave Impact, these folks who individually believed in our cause. And then eventually we did a couple of rounds of VC funding. Every round got easier because we had traction and we had demonstrated success and progress. And between 2020 to 2021, we actually grew our revenue and grew our customers by 7x. So that helped as we were going out in the 2021 for Series A. It was oversubscribed because of that traction we were making, even though initially no one really believed in the organization.
They underestimated two very powerful women, and I'm sure your mom instilled. They didn't realize what your mom instilled in you, and that drive. So, what that has led to is you actually recently sold to My Power Corp. So I'd love to understand, and congratulations about that decision, and how that will shape the future of Solstice, but also yourself and your role with the organization.
Yeah, and we started Solstice to build a company that looked and did things differently than a typical energy company. And addressing the climate crisis requires transformation, not business as usual. And we weren't planning on selling the company, honestly. When we were raising our Series A, we were approached from a few different companies interested in purchasing Solstice. And in consultation with our board, we said, okay, well, let's hear these offers out. And we found My Power to be the best fit partner for us. We're really proud to become of a highly respected company prioritizing sustainable development and clean energy infrastructure. And just as some background, My Power is the subsidiary in North America for Mitsui, which is a global respected firm, a Japanese conglomerate. Um, they've owned a number of extremely well-known companies, and we can leverage the stability and the strength of Mitsui to deepen our resources, expand to new markets, develop new services, and really continuing to deliver on the promises that we've made to the communities we serve. So we were really excited to join up with My Power because it gives us the infrastructure to move faster in democratizing the access to clean energy and making sure we avert climate damage. And so we're keeping our mission and services the same as ever. We're just going to be able to grow faster. And as a My Power company, we can mobilize more solar subscribers, offer new products and services outside of community solar that put the needs of households and communities first, and put clean energy in more communities than ever before and offer them guaranteed savings in the process. So there's so much work to be done in this climate crisis, and we're really, really, really excited to be a part of the My Power family.
Yeah, it sounds like the size and the collaboration will simply allow you to ultimately expand what you're doing and expand your mission, which at the end of the day, we have a lot of work to do with not a lot of time. So it sounds like a very, very smart decision on the plan in the future for Solstice. So we're getting close to the end of our time, and I wanted to just ask kind of one last question. That I always ask at the end is the book The Lorax influenced a lot of the branding and the naming of this podcast, but it's such a such a simple story, but such a good story around our overusing our resources. And Dr. Seuss somewhat called climate change 50 years ago. But at the end of this book, it's the child gets a seed, and it's what that child does with that seed and that outcome. And I always just like to ask the question of, you've spent so much time, and we've learned why you've spent time in this area. But what can people do if it's an individual or a business? What would you say to somebody that's thinking about either, getting into starting a business into clean energy or into climate related, or somebody thinking about moving their career to it, or just an individual that's, thinking individually, what can they do? What would you say?
Yeah, and we welcome that in the climate industry, that everyone has a role to play in climate change, and they can play it from every single industry. You don't have to work for a solar company, even though we love hiring people from outside the industry. You don't have to work for a solar company to combat climate change. And there's a big mythology about carbon footprints that people think, oh, the way I'm going to help solve climate change is I'm going to compost and I'm going to recycle and I'm going to try to reduce my own emissions. And that is definitely important, because living as an example to others will change others' behaviors. But actually, that's not what's causing climate change. The world's greenhouse gas emissions are actually 100 companies are producing over 70% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. And so we do need to encourage our companies, our towns, our cities, and our states to both elect leaders or appoint leaders that care about climate change, because they have a lot of power in creating emissions. And we have to try to do everything to encourage our towns, companies, homes, climates, to get off fossil fuels. So if you can, as an individual, if you can buy clean energy, you should, because that is what's forcing utilities to say, maybe we should get more clean energy because people are demanding it from us. The number one influencer in utilities getting more renewables is if their customers are demanding it. And then the second is electing leaders in policy and government to support climate change mitigation and to support us getting off fossil fuels. So caring about electing climate policymakers and encouraging your companies to buy clean energy too will be hugely beneficial to solving our climate crisis.
How can people find out more about Solstice?
You can get to our website at solstice.us. You can add your name to the wait list there and just peruse the website and learn a little bit more about the company, what we stand for, and how we're trying to work with partners on the ground to ensure that everyone has access to clean energy.
Steph, this has been a lot of fun. I appreciate your time. Congratulations to you and your co-founder and your entire team for doing what you're doing. It's obviously much, much needed, and it's been, I'm sure, a hard fight along the way. So thank you for everything that you do.
Thank you for what you've done, and appreciate the time.
All right. Thanks very much. This podcast is co-produced with The Brand is Female. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode of Someone Like You. And if you did, please share this. We're a new podcast, and I would love it if you could share it with a family member, friend, colleague, work colleague. Share it on Slack, whoever you do. Just share and spread the message of these incredible brands. Please also support these type of companies. They're doing the hard thing, and the hard thing often takes a lot of people to get on board. And don't forget, please subscribe on the platform of your choice and give us a rating and review. I'm Marco Pimentel. Thank you for joining us today. For more information on Someone Like You, you can find us on Instagram at Someone Like You Podcast, with all the links to the podcast, our website, and more information about the brands that we feature. Thank you again.